Welcome to Chatting with Voice. I am your host, Voice, and today I am honored to have baseball legend Pete Rose with me. Mr. Rose, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Voice. I hope today your listeners will find that I'm a very different man than I was over 20 years ago. In gambling, it's the furthest thing from my mind.
Mr. Rose, do you think we will ever see you get inducted into the Hall of Fame?
What are you talking about, Voice? I'm already honored to be in the WWE Hall of Fame. I've been there since 2004. Okay, I know you're talking about the Baseball Hall of Fame. I'd say that the odds are pretty good of me getting in soon. I'd put the over-under at 5 years. I think that sounds about right.
Recently you took a lie detector test. Are you hoping that this, and the fact there is a new baseball commissioner, will improve your chances to get in?
Well, you're really on to me there, Voice. I'm definitely trying to parlay the two into a real jackpot. I have high hopes for this new commissioner, and I thought the lie detector test, I thought I could use that as my ace in the hole. I'm really betting on myself to win here.
Before you go, do you have any thoughts on Pete Rose baseball for the Atari 7800?
Well, I'd wager that you'd have a hard time finding a better not only baseball game but sport game on the system. It's great to play with your friends or just by yourself. And is that cover great or what? I'd pick it not just to place or show, but to win outright. And don't forget to bring it to one of my autograph signings like this week's one, which will be held at the Lynx Casino.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Your answers were truly eye-opening.
Okay, thank you too there, Voice. Now I forget, did we agree for the payment to be in scratch-off lotto tickets or poker chips? I always forget to clarify that when I do these interviews.
On today's episode of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast, we will be talking about a P044-04 F-18 Hornet and a V045-04 Pete Rose baseball.
Hey guys, welcome to the Satellite of Pro. My name is Phil and I'm going to be your host this evening. Yeah, the much delayed episode is finally out. I apologize for the delay. I had lots of things going on the past couple weeks, and when I finally went to record, we had an extremely loud thunderstorm in my area, and my microphone picks up a lot, so I couldn't record during that, which is very funny. I'm going to talk about a baseball game, and literally my podcast got rained out, well, stormed out or thundered out, what have you. I want to offer a couple congratulations. First of all, to Cover Art Kevin. He does the cover art for a lot of my podcasts. He won a game as the listener of the months, and he picked a game of Galaga. I had a loose copy he picked, and I sent that off to him. So I hope you enjoy that, Kevin. You should have got that by now. Also want to congratulate Shinto, who's doing a bang-up job over at the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. You should definitely check that out and subscribe if you haven't already. He already did episode 0, and episode 1, which covered Cybermorph, just came out today. I haven't even had a chance to listen to it yet, but yeah, he's got 2 full episodes out and he's doing great. So be sure to check him out and also like his page over on the Facebook as well. Let's see. Oh yeah, I wanted to share something with you, something that I found personally exciting. I found a thread over at Atari Age, and it's called Colors Off on the 7800. And in it, there is a very cool picture of the 7800 board. If you open up the system, which you need to do very carefully, but if you open it up, I believe there's 5 screws on the bottom. And if your system has the shielding on it, if you take off the shield and you look at the board where the cartridge is out of, I noticed something interesting. My 7800, I have a modded one with the composite cables, and the colors were just a bit off. They weren't very rich. If you've ever seen some of the picture I posted for Cracked on my Facebook page for my cover photo for a while, was very, I don't know, it just wasn't as rich. And I was kind of disappointed. I was actually thinking of selling my modded system. But then I found this post, I opened up my system, and what it is right beneath the cartridge port, there's these 2 black wheels. They kind of have teeth to them. And what it is the top wheel you can use to adjust the color on your 7800 games. The bottom wheel is for 2600 games. So I was fiddling around with it a little bit. I took it off. I had it plugged in. Now do this at your own risk. If you decide to do this, please do it at your own risk. But I decided to take the risk. I opened it up, had it turned on. I accidentally shifted the 2600 color first when I was trying to do cracked, but I used the 7800 color shift. I just put a little screwdriver and just didn't turn it much, and all of a sudden, voila, the colors were richer. So if you ever think the colors are off on your games, you can use this to adjust them. Another interesting thing that happened to me is that Battlezone on the 2600 was giving me problems. It was shaking my screen a lot. And interestingly, when I accidentally turned that color shift wheel, it stopped the shaking. It wasn't shaking nearly as much as it did previously. So if you're having problems with some of your 2600 games, you might want to try turning that little shifting wheel. I think there was someone on my Facebook page who was complaining about Warlords. I believe it was Bobby. And I don't know. I think Bobby might be on a PAL system. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's over in Europe. I'm not entirely sure. But either way, Bobby, if you're listening, you might want to try, turning that dial, seeing if it takes care of the problems you were having with Warlords. I don't have a problem with Warlords on my system, but I do have a problem with Battlezone. But now it seems to have taken care of it a little bit. I might try to adjust it a little bit more. Another interesting thing too is when I open my system, around the cartridge there is like a plastic shield or whatever that goes around the cartridge port itself. And, you fit your cartridge in and it kind of, it's like a plastic barrier to the circuitry. Well, mine is cracked. And I guess that's why I don't have problems on the system fitting in Magic games or fitting in M Network games. And from what I understand, some people actually break them on purpose. They crack them. Again, do this at your own risk, but they crack them so that when you put something in there, it fits. And I guess that's why it is. I'm guessing whoever modded my system purposely cracked it on purpose on one of the corners. So now it has some give to it. And I can easily fit just about any 2600 game that usually gives problems to other systems. So just some things I thought I would share with you there. That color shifting thing is really cool. I'll try and remember to post this forum topic on my Facebook page. So if you want, you can go to my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/7800 game by game podcast. So there's no it's just 7800 game by game podcast. And if you haven't liked me on Facebook, please do so. I'd look forward to meeting you on there. So there you go. That is it as far as the intro goes. I'm really amazed to find that color, how to shift the colors. It just made a world of difference for me. Let's go on to today's games, Pete Rose Baseball and F-18 Hornet.
The games and phrases in the following bumper do not necessarily reflect those of the Atari 7800 game-by-game podcast or the Atari 2600 game-by-game podcast.
Hey everybody, this might be Jimmy G.
And this might be Sean.
And we might be involved with the Pie Factory podcast. And when we're not doing our show, we may or may not be listening to Ferg and or Phil on either the Atari 2600 game-by-game podcast
or the Atari 7800 game-by-game podcast. Ferg or Phil. That reminds me of back in the day how I used to have to get my burger fill. Cheeseburgers.
Really, mister, I do not know what you are doing with that.
There was a I between Mr. and I do something like, "Hey, Mister, do you know what you're saying?" Or,
let me think. Wow, that's awkward.
F-18 Hornet was made by John Van Ryzen, who's most famous for making the game Hero on the Atari 2600. Now, I did a little bit of research, and from what I understand, John's a very private guy, so I did find his Facebook, but I decided against ask him questions, since I actually saw that some other people were trying to ask him questions. He never responded, so I get the feeling that he just kind of wants to sit back and enjoy life right now. But I did find an interview that was published at Digital Press, and it was done by a guy named Tim Durate, and I'm sorry if I'm saying any names wrong. I do mispronounce names. Well, I mispronounce a lot of stuff, actually, so all apologies if I ever do that, if you know the person personally. But anyways, let's go ahead and read this interview that came with Mr. John Van Ryzen. So Digital Press asks, how did you get into programming video games? Did you study it in school? And John says, no, I went to school for electrical engineering. I was in a program where if you got a summer job that was related to your field, you could earn college credit. I ended up getting a summer job at a place that was making handheld electronic games, the ones with LED lights on them. Then the Atari 2600 came out, and the company wanted to move from making the handheld games to the Atari games. And what company was this? That was Wickstead Design Associates. Oh, I've never heard of that company. This is a company that Gary Kitchen came from. I wasn't creating 2600 games there. I was building prototypes of electronical toys. When I graduated college, Gary Kitchen left Wickstead and started writing games for himself. So I started writing games on my own. He would get deals and sell them for me. Where did the Activision games were these the Activision games you designed? No, these were games for the Apple II computer. I started out buying an Apple II computer and I wrote a few games and they were published by Hayden Software. I did that for about a year and then I was hired by Activision after that. Do you recall any of the names of the handheld games you designed? I didn't create any. I was just a junior guy who didn't even have his degree yet. I just created these prototypes of wacky toy ideas that they had. For the Atari 2600, were Hero and Cosmic Commuter the only games you did while at Activision? I worked on some others, but for games that were totally my work, those were the only two. When you were programming games for the 2600 at Activision, how much code sharing went on? The games seemed to be based on the same graphics and scoring engine or style. There were a few basic things such as logo and score that were shared, but other than that, everything was written from scratch. There was a lot of sharing ideas. For example, someone would figure out a trick on how to do something and they would tell everyone else how it was done. Were the 2600 games written on an Apple II? No, those two games were written on a DEC PDP-11. What was the process of creating a game for the 2600? I would write the program on a PDP-11 and then compile the program. It was then transferred or downloaded to a developmental system, a box that emulates an Atari 2600. The box had a joystick coming out of it, so I could sit there and play it. I didn't have to burn a ROM. I could make changes to the program on the PDP-11 and transfer it to the box again for testing. Inside the box was the 2600, but a number of tools were connected to it. I could stop the game and examine what was going on. I could debug my program. How does the developmental system compare to the ones for the other systems you create games on? Well, on the Commodore 64, I would just program right on that machine. It was much more elaborate though. A real simple developmental system where you would just emulate the ROM, the chip that has the program in it. This is the easiest developmental system to create, but the hardest to use. There are no tools for looking for bugs. The developmental system for the Genesis and Super Nintendo are very elaborate. They are similar to the Atari 2600 developmental system, where I could stop the program and examine the registers, start the game again, and etc. It makes it very easy to find bugs in the program. What about the developmental systems for the Game Boy and the Game Gear? Yeah, they're available. Do you have to buy development systems or do you rent them? It varies. A programmer can buy one from Nintendo or Sega, from a third-party company that creates them, or you can create your own. Basically, the more elaborate the development system is, the more money it costs. Hero was the first game that featured a rainbow-style Activision logo on screen. Were you responsible for creating this? No, that was created in the California office. I believe David Crane was responsible for that, and he just passed it around for other programmers to put in their games. Warren Robinette secretly hid his name with an adventure by Atari. Are there any Easter eggs in any of your games? I never really hid my initials or my name in any of my games. With all the companies I've ever worked with, I've been given credit for designing or porting or adapting almost every game I've ever done. I never really felt any need to do that. Well, in Warren's case, it was the late 70s and the designers were not given credit. When you were with Activision, did you work from home as well? No, I worked in a New Jersey office. Do you work out of your home for Absolute Entertainment? I freelance for Absolute. I was one of the founders of Absolute Entertainment. I worked there for a few years, left, sold my ownership in the company, and I've been doing stuff on my own ever since. However, I have done a lot of work with them independently. Are there classic games that you like to play back then? Back then, my favorite game was Mega Mania by Activision. Do you still have a classic system? Yeah, I have a pretty big collection. I have an Atari 7800 that I use once in a while. One of the perks of working with Activision, that when I first came there, they gave me every single game that the company made. While working there, every time a new game was released, I was given a free copy. All programmers had this bonus. Are you the programmer that beat all the Activision games and owns all the club patches? Note, the hero manual states that John belongs to almost every Activision club. I didn't beat everyone. The one that I got started and got me addicted to the whole video game business was skiing by Activision. Years ago at a local store, there was a contest for skiing and laser blast also by Activision. I took part in that and went and bought skiing, and my brother and I would compete. It was really strange because I was really into it. And around a year later, all of a sudden, I was working for Activision making games. This was strange, especially considering the company was in California and I was in New Jersey. Oh, that's good timing. It was a whole thing with the part-time job while I was in college. I met all these people who were into handheld games and also wanted to get into video games. One thing led to another. Do you have any favorite games on newer systems? In my spare time, I like playing arcade games more than I like playing home games. I'm at a home programmer and working on home games all day long. I like playing arcade games because I feel like I'm getting some experience more than home games. In the arcade, my favorite these days is the virtual racing game, Sega's Virtual Racing. I can play that game all day long. By the end of the workday, do you find yourself so sick of video games that you just want to turn everything off? Or do you find yourself playing games in your spare time? It depends. When I get to the end of a project, I work a lot of hours. It's really intense. When I'm going through this phase, I really have no energy left towards it. Sometimes I just want to do something that doesn't have anything to do with it. Just change my train of thought. Then I come back fresh. But in a normal time period, I can work all day long, then go to an arcade at night with my nephew and play arcade games for a few hours. It has to be something different as opposed to sitting in front of a game system, which I do all day long. Were there any other 2600 games that you did that were never released? There was talk about some unreleased games by Activision, and little is known about them. I talked to some other Activision programmers. Supposedly Zenjay was going to be released. Do you know of any games that were close to completion but were never released? Yeah, there were a lot of them. You'd be amazed how much of that happened. In the peak of the 2600 days, Activision was very concerned about their image. They would only release games that were really good. If a game didn't live up to its reputation, Activision had no desire to release it. Cosmic Commuter is a perfect example. I finished that game in the peak of the industry when the 2600 was really hot stuff. Activision felt it didn't measure up. They decided not to release it then. That was really disappointing for me. I finally got a job with this big successful company. I write a game, work like crazy doing it, get to the end, and then they decide that they don't want to publish it. It probably took me 9 months to write that game. So then I wrote Hero. They thought Hero did measure up and they released it. 6 months to a year later, they decided to release Cosmic Commuter as well. There were a lot of games that the company was not thrilled with. Activision opened up a number of design centers where all people who worked there wrote games. Activision would say that they didn't like any of the games. Those games were not released, and then the design center would be shut down. Then some of the guys from the Boston Design Center that wrote a couple of games that were pretty good, and Activision never released them. I only wrote 2 for the 2600. Did you have any ideas for a game that never saw the light of day? I always have more ideas for games than finished games. It's a lot easier to have an idea to actually go through all the work to actually create the game. How are programming games today different from programming games when you first started? Today I worked on my own, but I really don't. I have my own consulting company. I'm capable of creating an entire game myself, but time-wise it's impractical. I must have other people to help me do it. I hire a consultant to do the music, a consultant to do some or most of the graphics, someone who writes the program with me, that kind of thing. In the olden days, I could do the whole game myself. I did this for a long time, even beyond the 2600. You just can't compete today in that way. With the complexity of the games and the amount of detail in the graphics and the depth of the sound effects and music in today's game, there's no way I could do it myself. I could, but it would take so long that by the time I finish, that particular game system probably wouldn't be selling anymore. Have you programmed any games on the computer platforms, IBM, Macintosh? No, I haven't. I'm interested in doing it, though. I find multimedia computers to be interesting. What are you doing now? I work out of my home and have my own consulting company called Panoramic Software. I am almost finished with an original game for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis called Hellfire Run. What's the process in receiving payment for creating a game? Basically, third-party companies hire me to create a game, they pay me in advance and royalties on the game. Was it like that 10 years ago? No, I was an employee and it was just salary and bonus. Where do you see the gaming industry heading in 5-10 years from now? I think creating games is going to become more like a job of manipulating databases that already exist. As I said before, when I create a game, I now hire a musician and a graphic artist. I don't see that being very realistic 5 years from now. I think I'll have to take existing information from something else, for example, from a movie. I'll be taking all the sound effects, film clips, music, etc., and turning it into a game. Creating it from scratch at the level games seem to be going towards will not be enough. The only people who will be able to create special effects that will be required in a game will be the people in the movie studio. I won't be able to create that stuff because I'm not a Hollywood studio. The virtual reality polygon world has a lot to offer too. I could create a virtual reality game myself by purchasing data or objects to be put in 3D worlds instead of creating data. Programmers will be acquiring it from somewhere else. And that's where the interview ends. And of course, that was done during the 16-bit days. So he was still working on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. It just goes to show you that must have been a very early digital press article. They've been around or I wonder if that was when they were just in print, because I think originally digital press was a newsletter. But then they give you his kind of gameology, some of the stuff he worked on. And of course, some other titles I didn't say, like Heavy Shredding on the NES, worked on that. How about the version of Race Driving or Steel Talons on the SNES, or Ren and Stimpy's Vidiots on the Game Boy, her Super Battle Tank on the Game Boy and Game Gear. That's just some of the stuff he did. So that's a cool interview. Go to Digital Press to check it out. And it's interesting where he kind of looked where games were heading, and what ended up happening is basically games nowadays, I view them almost like movie studios. You have just this huge amount of people working for you. And I guess sometimes they do manipulate existing data, but I think what they're doing is they're just creating it like a movie itself. It's amazing how far the gaming industry has gone in that regard. Okay, so F-18 Hornet came out, has a copyright year 1988. And the box, well, it's kind of cool. It's kind of reminiscent of Top Gun in a sense. You have kind of, it looks like it's like at dusk or nighttime. It's a very dark image. You can see your plane at the bottom of the box, just kind of the silhouette. You can't really see much detail, but because you have like the sun right behind you, and the sky is a mix of red and black colors. And you can see that the cockpit of the plane is open. And above you see a map of the world highlighted, all the continents, well, not Antarctica, but, like North America and Africa and Asia. You see all that highlighted in red, so there's like this red outline. It's very unique. The title F-18 Hornet is just a white outline at the very top of the box, using the black background kind of for the lettering. I think it's a cool looking box. I really do. And it does say by John Van Ryzen in the bottom. And at the bottom on the left hand side, they had this sticker. And I remember these stickers. They're yellow, and it said 7000. And I think what it was is this is a product of this time when computer companies would release software for different systems. They would essentially use the same box, but at the bottom or somewhere they just put a sticker telling you what system it was for. And of course, you have the absolute title on the front as well, but you also have the absolute title on the back. On the back, you have a daytime picture. You're basically looking at the tail end of an aircraft carrier and a plane about to land. You can see the ocean behind you and just clear blue skies everywhere. They give you 6 screenshots. I think that's the most screenshots I've seen for any 7800 game to date. So the first screenshot shows you just the map that you see at the beginning of your mission. Then you have a screenshot of your plane on a runway before it takes off. Then you see the next 4 screenshots are basically showing you getting closer and closer and landing on an aircraft carrier. So like the first one, it shows the aircraft carrier farther away, and then it gets closer and closer. They could have probably added a little more detail, different, I guess you don't need 4 screenshots of the aircraft carrier, but wow, they actually gave you 6 screenshots, which I think the more screenshots, the better. And it says on the back of the box, active duty. Attention all naval aviators, report to your squadron leaders and prepare for deployment. Your tour duty will take you around the world on some of the most challenging and dangerous missions of your career. F-18 Hornet is a carrier-based adventure fast, solid 3D graphics, and responsive instrumentation for an incredible sensation of flight. And boy, does that sound like it's really pushing the envelope as far as the 7800. You know, I mean, 3D graphics and responsive instrumentation. That sounds like something you'd expect on a computer game. Flying missions through a variety of terrain, executing aerial combat, emergency supply drops, strafing and bombing ROMs while battling hostile jets, helicopters, and tanks. F-18 Hornet features all the action of the carrier-based jets, include the thrilling aircraft carrier takeoff and the landings in smooth 3D animation. Now, I will say that's kind of hard to read some of this text because it's white text and it's put over the aircraft carrier in the ocean, but you can kind of see kind of waves in the wake of the aircraft carrier that are white, and it blends in with the text, making it a little difficult to see. And it says at the bottom, distributed by, I never noticed this before, distributed by Mediagenic, which was Activision's name. They changed their name for a while to Mediagenic. So basically, Activision distributed this Absolute title, and that it makes a lot of sense because the Absolute cartridges are very, 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 very similar to the Activision cartridges, and they even have a little bit of the Actiplaque kind of problem going on as far as the glue, but not usually as bad because a lot of the Absolute games use black, and the black hides the Actiplaque, the glue coming through. The cartridge is very, very generic looking, except the F-18 Hornet, instead of being in white outlines, is now in yellow outlines, and it just says F-18 Hornet by John Van Ryzen for the Atari 7800, and then the Absolute logo is there as well. There's no pictures on them. The manual's huge. It's like a 20-page manual. So I'll try and skip what I can, but the cover is just a black and white version of the box, and at the bottom it calls it a flight manual. And I like when game companies, just like they did with Impossible Mission, when they treated it like it's not just a manual, it's like a top secret. So let's go on. Okay, the first page. It says, welcome to the Atari 7800 version of F-18 Hornet. Designer John Van Ryzen has incorporated all the challenges of authentic fighter jet operations into this stimulating game. You'll need all the skills of a Top Gun pilot to successfully complete each of the 4 missions. The first mission is a train run through the China Lake Naval Weapons Station in the Mojave Desert. Then you'll be sent across the globe to carry out dangerous assignments in hostile territory. In this manual, you'll find everything you need to get started. Mission objectives, aerial maps, top secret intelligence reports providing details of enemy arsenal and terrain. John has also provided some tips on the operation of F-18 Hornet to help you along your way in earning the rank of Top Gun, the best pilot in the Navy. Good luck. And it actually shows a picture of John. It reminds me of the Activision manuals at the end, and then it shows just a diagram of the plane looking at a top-down perspective. Okay, then it goes on. F-18 Hornet is a one-player fighter simulator in which player pilots a Navy F-18A jet through a series of simulated combat simulations, including carrier takeoffs and landings, bombing, strafings, and air combat. In each of the 4 missions, you are confronted with a variety of opponents and must perform a series of combat objectives in order to reach the top naval aviator rank. Prior to takeoff, you are given flight orders from the appropriate command HQ, depending where in the world the mission is being flown. And by the way, the command HQ always looks the same no matter where you're at. After receiving your orders, you must successfully take off, fly the complete mission, including the execution of your primary objectives, bombing a HQ or dropping a supply, something like that, and finally land your F-18 at the designated landing site. After completing the mission or crashing if unsuccessful, you are ranked according to your performance in the flying aircraft, defeat enemy aggressors, and completing the primary mission objectives. And then it goes on to tell you how to turn on the system, basically put the cartridge in, turn on the power, stuff like that. All right. The title page showing the F-18 Hornet should first appear on screen. Push the left button on the joystick to advance to the select mode. A map of the world will appear, and below instructions to select the mission. Use the joystick to select a mission and press the left joystick button to start it. Keep pressing the joystick forward to read the complete mission orders. To bypass orders, press the left joystick button. Controls. F-18 Hornet uses both console and joystick control. It assumes that your system is plugged into the left controller input of the Atari 7800. And it says, note, you must use an Atari 7800 joystick incorporating both the left and right fire buttons. On the system, it says the reset starts the game. Select get your landing gear up or down. Pauses. The right difficulty switch ejects and the left difficulty switch drops the payload. And you want to make sure you get those right. And I'll also say this. If you don't, now the left difficulty switch is for dropping supplies or for dropping a bomb. If you're bombing, there's a mission where you do both of those. If you don't have to do that in a mission, I think I accidentally did that once. I believe it basically ejects you. So you want to be careful. And you want to be careful that you touch the right switch, because there was a couple times where I accidentally ejected because I flipped the right one instead of the left one. And I also say this, it doesn't matter which position the difficulty switch is in. So like one time if it's to the right and you flip it to the left, and the next time it's to the left and flip it to the right, it'll still work. So don't worry about that. All you have to do is flip it in whatever direction it's not in for it to work. The joystick is an easy way to remember how the joystick works is to think of it as a throttle when the left button is pressed and a control yoke when the left button is not pressed. When you're pressing the left button, pushing forward starts the engines and increases throttle, whether flying or on the ground, and pushing back decreases the throttle when flying or reverses the thrust if the jets is on the ground, which you use for landing. So you pull back when you're landing to kind of hit the brakes, basically. When the left button is not being pressed, you can go left or right by moving that way. Forward, it makes you move forward if you're taxiing on a runway, or dives if you're flying. Back turns your jet around if it's on the ground, and climbs if flying. And then the right button fires missiles. So let me explain this really quick. So like, let's say if you landed somewhere, if you hit the back, if you hit down on the joystick or back, it'll flip your plane around, because in this game, when you're flying, you just go straight. You can't turn around in this game. You just go straight. You can go to the left or right, but you're not going to do any turning around. So if you missed something and you want to go back, you can actually do that. You can turn around and take off and try and hit what you missed and then land at the beginning. I believe every time you land somewhere, you get refueled, and that's unlimited. I also use this in a couple of the later missions, because when I landed on a runway, because some of the missions you land halfway through before you take off again, I didn't have a lot of room to take off. And if you are trying to take off on a runway, but you run onto the ground, even though, the plane, you wouldn't think it would crash just going into grass, it crashes if it leaves the runway. So what I did was I turned around, I did a little throttling to go down the runway, go in the opposite direction. Then I turned around again, and now, voila, I had more room to take off. All right, the next page gives you it gives you a picture of all your instrumentation. So let me go from left to right. You have your throttle. It's a switch. I'm doing the top switches. At the bottom is your digitals. So at the top you have your throttle, which goes up if you're going faster. Your compass, your threat radar. You have your airspeed dial. Then you have your thrust dial, and above those two dials, you have your little crosshair, and there's above those two dials and underneath the crosshair, there's two rectangular standing up pieces. The left one will blink when the target's in range. The right one will blink when the target is locked. However, if you fire a missile when the target is locked, it doesn't mean it's going to destroy it if you move to the right or left. What I found was you basically have to keep that guy in your crosshair locked until he's destroyed, which can be tricky, because at the same time they often fire at you. So you want to destroy him and then immediately move to the right or left to avoid his missile. Usually I move to the right. I don't know if moving to the left makes a difference. Okay, so we're going on our dials. Next, you have a series of 3 dials that are like stacked on each other. The top dial is your horizontal, your middle dial is the vertical, and the bottom dial is your altimeter. Then you have your attitude display, and that just shows you how flat you are to the ground, or if you're kind of banking right or left. By the way, when you bank, the screen doesn't bank with you, so you have to kind of go on the meter. And then you have your fuel gauge, and at the very bottom, and then in between those, you have your bay door. It's a switch, so basically when you switch your difficulty switch, it switches to the other side, and the landing gear as well. Same thing with the difficulty switch as your final one. Then at the bottom of the screen, you have your speedometer, your vertical and horizontal in degrees. You have how the time in the middle, your gear, it'll tell you if it's up or down, your altimeter. Then you have how many missiles in the total right-hand column, how many missiles you have left, how much fuel you have remained, and the thrust. Now, most of the game, if you're like me, you'll look at the digital readout. But here's the deal. If you get hit, you can get hit once while flying. An enemy can shoot you with a missile once, and you can keep going. but all your digital readouts will be frozen and you'll have to go by your old-fashioned dials, which takes a little, it's tough. It's at that point, I'm about to reset the game. Okay, so I think I pretty much told you what everything is, so I'm not going to read you all of the stuff about what I just told you, but it does say this. Taxiing, when the aircraft is on the ground, you can taxi by pushing the joystick in the desired direction, tap the joystick back to turn the plane around, and then take off. To take off from the runway, hold down on the left button and push the joystick forward. This will increase your thrust. When your speed gets greater than Mach 0.32, release the button and pull back on the joystick. Once airborne, you can control your altitude, direction, and speed with the joystick. Note, remember to leave enough room on the runway for the aircraft to get airborne. Landing gear. Your landing gear goes up automatically after takeoff. To put it down, again, press the select key. By the way, if you're wondering, well, why don't you just keep your landing gear down the whole time? It affects your fuel consumption. You'll consume more fuel when you do it. I actually played around with that, and that happens. Landing, and this is probably the most difficult part of the game. To land, you must drop your thrust to 31%. And by the way, it does this. It doesn't do it in like single percent digits. It does it in chunks, so you can hit this pretty easily. And put down your landing gear. Begin your descent by pushing the joystick forward. Your vertical attack angle, which is the vertical degrees on the screen, should be -5 to -10 degrees. Your horizon attack angle should be 0 degrees, and your airspeed should be less than 0.5 Mach. Once on the ground, hold down on the left button and pull back on the joystick to throttle down your engines. When your thrust reaches 0, the engine will go in reverse. This allows you to come to a complete stop. Note, you cannot land on water or rough-looking terrain. That's when you automatically crash. Aircraft carriers. When taking off from an aircraft carrier, you are locked into the catapult at the back of the ship. You must increase your thrust to 99% in order to be catapulted successfully from the carrier. If you land on the X at the back of the aircraft carrier, the F-18's arrestor hook will catch the carrier's cable and stop you automatically. At this point, you decrease your RPMs to 0% to shut down your engines. Moving the joystick releases the hook. It's also possible to land successfully without hitting the cable. And I don't know if I ever really hit the cable. To do so, you must stop as quick as possible, or your plane will fall off the front of the carrier. Take off again, you must turn around by pulling back on your joystick and move up to the back of the carrier, which will allow you enough room to take off. If you move into the X on the back of the carrier, a sound will indicate that you're locked into the catapult for takeoff. Weapons. To fire a missile, you push the right joystick button. You take off with a total of 20 for each mission. Targets are tanks, jets, and helicopters. Destroying all the targets will increase your ranking. However, if you miss, avoid colliding with the targets since this will damage your aircraft. And I'll say this, one time I actually flew into a helicopter and that destroys you. No second chance. Your radar display shows a long-range view of the approaching targets. When the target's in range, to the left center light of the panel will blink. When the target's locked, the right will blink. Note, to shoot moving ground targets, you can either land or fly in the direction they are moving. Refueling. To refuel, you must land at a designated fueling areas as marked by the mission maps. By the way, they talk about these maps. You need the maps for this game. You absolutely need them. This game, it would be cool if it had a map in the game. It doesn't. You need the maps for the game. So go to Atari Age if you're playing this game and you don't have a manual and get the maps. It'll really help you. This is really a game where you really kind of have to read the manual, and it's a kind of a beast to take on. Once your aircraft comes to a complete stop, the refueling begins. When you're completely refueled, the aircraft enters taxi mode. Payload. Your F-18 will be carrying either supply cargo or bombs depending on the mission. Dropping the payload is accomplished by using the left difficulty switch on the system. I'm not going to say console anymore because I get told how I say it wrong, and I'm sorry my accents. I want to say console, and that's just how it is. So I'll try and say system instead, and if I even console, I don't know. To me, it sounds wrong, and I know it's right, whatever. Okay, throw the switch when you are directly over the target site. If you hit the target, you will either hear a hit or see a flash of explosions for a bomb drop. This will not happen if you miss. So you'll either hear a sound or you'll hear the explosion. And I actually found that this works pretty well. So it also says, note, if you drop a bomb while you're on the ground, you'll blow up. That's awesome. Ejecting, throwing the right difficulty switch ejects you from the aircraft. You will save yourself by parachuting safely to the ground. This should only be done when you have no chance of surviving a crash landing. Ejecting from a crashing aircraft will increase your rank since the plane was lost, but the pilot was saved. Note, ejecting while on the ground does not allow enough time for your parachute to open. Consequently, you will be killed. Ranking. Your goal varies in each mission. Mission 1 is a train mission requiring you to fly to designated areas while destroying ground targets. The more complex missions have refueling sites and drops where you must drop your payload, bomb, or supplies. Your score is based on 6 variables. The status, whether you complete the mission. Targets, how many you destroyed, and whether you successfully dropped your payload. Courage, whether you've flown difficult maneuvers. So this means there's some missions where in order to do it, they want you to like fly underneath bridges and in these little areas. And oh my goodness. Craft, the condition of your jet at the end of the mission. Pilot, if you're alive, I guess. And landing, if you performed a textbook landing on the carrier deck. And that determines your rank. And there are several ranks. The lowest is AWOL. Then Swabo, which is responsible for swabbing the deck. Cadet, Ensign, Lieutenant, Captain, Ace, one of the Navy's best pilots, and then Top Gun. Now, in order to do this, according to manual, you have to get Ace on all 4 missions sequentially. So I guess you have to start with mission 1 and go all the way. And I'm guessing if you mess up at all, you have to start at the beginning. I don't know how the programming goes, but I'm guessing that's how it does. Hints. Use the intelligent reports to learn the general altitude of the carrier in every basic areas. If you know the altitude, you can align yourself well before you approach the site. So yeah, the carrier's has a certain altitude. So if you're at 10 altitude, but the carrier's at 100, you'll crash into it. If you miss a target or landing area, you can turn around. I already talked about that. And if you're damaged once, your windshield will crack. And I talked about that. The digital display won't work. You have to use your instruments. And when you destroy an enemy helicopter or plane, move out of the way so that you don't get hit by the debris or the debris or the shot. By the way, the tanks I don't think shoot at you. I think it's just the flying enemies. And let's see. If you are damaged twice or run out of fuel, you lose most of your ship's controls. At this point, it's still possible to land by holding back on the joystick. This controls your fall to a safe level. If you cannot perform a crash landing, you should eject. Both of these methods yield a higher score to save it. To successfully achieve ace ranking, you must also perform maneuvers that will earn you top courage rankings. These include flying under bridges and through hangars and gateways. And let's see, this game has been designed so that you are not required to play for rank. There is no time limit. You can refuel as many times as you wish. You can just explore the scenery. So just keep flying back and forth. And then the missions. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of describe you the missions. It shows you kind of like a general what's going on in every mission. So the first mission, you start at the beginning. There is no landing in the middle, I don't believe. You just fly all the way to the end. There's just a bunch of tanks. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tanks, and then there's landing at the end. And you really need these maps to kind of get an idea where things are. The European mission, let's see what we have to do here. In the European mission, you have tanks, but in between you have a couple planes and you have an aircraft carrier to land in the middle. And then at the end, you have to land in a landing area that's under a hangar. So, and beyond a wall. So if you're coming in too low, you'll hit the wall. If you're coming in too high, you'll hit the hangar. And when I say hangar, I don't know. I'm in the South. I live in the South, and some people, they don't have garages, but they have basically what these hangars are. They're just canopies, if you will. So these are just kind of canopies, like easy ups, gigantic easy ups, if you know what those are. And that's mission 2. The Central American mission. Now, this is the first one where I believe you have to drop off something. So what you have to do is you have to take off, fight 2 planes, and then drop a supply target in one of these islands. And they show you a picture. It has a building and like a little runway that you're not supposed to land on. You just drop it in this area. And as I said, you have to look at these maps. Then you have to defeat another plane. There's a landing area in the middle. It's a landing strip under a canopy. Then you take off to attack one more plane, and then you land at a carrier at the end. And then the final mission, which takes place in Southeast Asia, you have to take off. There is a building that's behind a wall. By the way, when you bomb, you have to be low enough. I think it's like under 2,000 feet, something like that. If you're like at 1,000 feet, you should be fine. So you have to fly over this building, drop your bomb on top of it, then take on some more helicopters, land on a hangar, take a couple more helicopters on, and then land in another landing area at the end. But the hangar was really tricky. This was the hangar in the middle where you land. I had to back up to take off. All right, and that is basically the game. So, yeah, this is a monster. If you are not up if you're not up to the learning curve, just, kind of back off. This is a flight simulator. This is not pick up and play at all. It has a learning curve, especially with the graphics, because the graphics are they're both good and bad. Bad because, well, the good is it scales. Okay, it is kind of 3D. It reminds me of like an early 16-bit flight simulator, but not, of course, it's not to that level graphically. So you have these buildings and objects that as you get closer, they increase in size. The problem is when they're far away, they look like blobs. It's very hard to see the details, and you almost can't see the details of the object till it gets really close, as far as like some of the enemies and the buildings go. So it's impressive that it's really pushing the system, I believe. But at the same time, I don't think the system was totally ready to handle this. The music and the sound at the beginning, you have this kind of percussion kind of beat going on. And then other than that, it's a flight simulator. You just hear your engines kind of rising and falling as the RPMs rev up and rev down. For what it's doing, it does a good job. You have some basic sounds blowing up stuff, but otherwise, nothing really impressive. But then again, flight simulators, for the most part, it's supposed to kind of just make you feel like you're flying a jet plane, not blow you away with the sounds, especially during this time. So nothing that great. Over at Atari Age, it got a Rarity 4. Digital Press gave it a Rarity 3. I would lean towards the Atari Age rating here. There was only one review at Atari Age, external review, and it got a 50% out of 100. And there was no high score club for this game because it'd be kind of hard to score. I don't know how you do it unless you posted screenshots. I don't know. I think it'd be really hard. I mean, you could do it with the ranks, but again, tough to do. On eBay, loose copies were going for about $13 to $14, but if you found the right auction, you could get it cheaper. Complete copies were going for about $30. New copies were selling for $40 to $65. Did not own this as a kid. I owned F-18 Tomcat for the 2600 before this game came out. And so I think I saw the box at Toys R Us, but I was happy with my copy of Tomcat. So there you go. That is the beast that is F-18 Hornet. Quite a game to cover. Breathe, breathe, breathe. And now let's go to our next game.
Hey, this is Willie
And this is RK.
from the 5200 Super Podcast.
Hey, this is Ferg. What am I doing here?
What are you doing here?
We like listening to the 7800 Game by Game Podcast.
I know I do, especially when I'm not down at the river wringing out my 7800 circuit board.
Beating against the rock.
Pete Rose Baseball came out, I believe, in 1989, near the end of the system's life. It was originally done by Alex DeMeo for the 2600, but the 7800 version was made by Robert Curtis, and I don't really know if he did much other than that. Let's see, the box of Pete Rose Baseball, if you know the 2600 version of the game, it looks pretty much the same thing, except at the bottom it says for the Atari 7800 in white print, and near the top there's a little yellow box that says Super Graphics for the Atari 7800. The box itself, it just says Pete Rose in red, Baseball in blue with a yellow outline by Alex DeMeo. And of course, Alex didn't do this copy of the game, but they're still giving him credit, which is kind of interesting. And it's just a shot of Pete Rose at bat. You can just see him from the waist up. You can't even see his eyes because the plastic helmet is over his eyes. And it looks like he's wearing a Cincinnati's red uniform, but they've used Photoshop or something to remove all the Cincinnati red logos. So you could just see him getting ready to swing his bat. And of course, you have the absolute triangle on there. And the whole front of the box is like one photo. There's no border. It just looks like a photo, and they just put the stuff over this picture of Pete Rose. On the back, it has a green backdrop, and it says, "I play baseball one way, all out, Pete Rose," and it has Pete Rose's signature. Here's the first 7800 baseball game to live up to this winning attitude. I wonder if that's a dig at real sports baseball. I'm not sure. It says top quality graphics and 6 camera angles give the feeling of a network TV broadcast, professional fielding strategies, stay on your toes and anticipate which fielder will make the play. I really don't. There really isn't much strategy because you just automatically get control of them. Mix up your pitches. Go for shutout fastballs. Fastballs, curves, changeup, and screwballs and sinkers. Try hitting for the cycle. Clean singles, doubles down the line, triples off the wall, and those long round trippers. Play to a packed stadium, complete with a cheering crowd, animating scoreboard, and organist. Man, that makes it sound a lot better than the actual presentation. Head-to-head action with your friends or against the computer. The most exciting baseball game ever on the 7800 with depth and feel you usually see on big league home computers. It says 2 joysticks required for 2-player mode. And it shows you 3 pictures. One is the behind-the-back pitcher mode where the pitcher is about to pitch the ball to the batter. The other is one half of the field, the first base side of the field. And then the other is, I guess that's right field. Is that right field? I get mixed up. I don't know if it's right field when you look down at it, but it's the same side as first base. And you can see the 335 marker on the wall. So it's the outfield there as well. So good selection of pictures in my humble opinion. The cartridge is just your standard kind of boring, absolute black background with Pete Rose Baseball in yellow lettering by Alex DeMeo again, even though, again, Alex didn't do this version, but they based it off of his work by far. It's an 8-page stapled manual. The cover is just a black and white version of the box art, but what I like is they call it a rule book. So they're kind of making it, like a baseball would have a rule book. They don't just call it an instruction manual. And like I said, I like it when manuals try and treat themselves more than just manuals. The first page, I believe, is Alex DeMeo, who's looking very 80s with some poofy hair, a nice striped shirt, and kind of leaning on his hand and looking like he's too cool to smile. And it says, "My Baseball Stats" by Alex DeMeo, designer of Pete Rose Baseball and diehard sports fan. He says, "For over 10 years, I've coached and played local league ball, spending most of that time pitching and power hitting, and I loved every inning of it. I tried to capture those action-packed feelings in your Pete Rose Baseball video game. In fact, I designed the game so fun and so real that you'll want to put on a pair of cleats and hit a few out. So even if you can't physically be at a ballpark, you can still feel all the excitement and competitive pro baseball without ever leaving your room. I've spent years designing sport games. I've trained long and hard for this moment, and now that it's here, let's not waste another minute. Play ball." And it says, "This game is dedicated to the memory of my dear brother David, who I'm assuming passed away with an untimely death," which is sweet. I don't remember very many games dedicated to that. The next page is just kind of telling you what's on every page, and then you have your standard how to turn on your system and all that stuff. Play ball. Pressing select will bring you to the pitching batting screen to start a new game. There you'll have a choice of either playing a computer 1-player or an opponent 2-player, which is displayed at the top of the screen. Repeatedly pressing select will switch between these 2 modes. To play ball, press the reset and the game will begin. The series. It's the last game of the World Series. Copyright infringement. I don't think you're supposed to say World Series unless you get the Major League Baseball permission, but maybe that was before they enforced that. You're in the 9th inning, bases loaded, 1 out, and you're up at bat. What do? Swing away, wait for a walk, go for the fences? It's all up to you, just like in real pro ball. Sure, we'll give you the options and some tips like pitching, batting, and fielding, but it's all your call. There are 6 full-color live-action screens, just like the ones you see on TV. Wouldn't it be funny if one of those screens was black and white? There's 5 full-color and 1 black and white. Anyways, the pitching and batting screen, left infield, right infield, left field, center field, and right field. So start warming up, step up to the plate, and take your best swing at winning this series. So I guess they're trying to say that this is the final game of the World Series, even though it's just one game, no season mode, nothing like that. Pitching and batting. Excitement on the mound for pitching. First, decide whether you want to pitch inside or out. Move the joystick left or right to position your pitcher on the pitching rubber. Next, use your joystick to control the velocity of the pitch, up for fast, down for slow. Once you positioned your pitcher and selected a pitch speed, Press the button to start the windup and move your joystick up for a fastball, down for a sinker, left for a screwball, right for a curveball, or center for a changeup. When the pitcher releases the ball, the joystick position will determine what pitch is thrown. So yeah, up for fastball, down for sinker, left for screwball, right for curveball, and center for changeup. So pretty standard there, but it works well. Batting. To get the ball rolling or flying, you first have to connect. Use the joystick to move your player around the batter's box. You can move the batter up or down to swing high, down the middle, or low. You can also move left or right for hitting inside and outside pitches. As you see the pitch coming, you can make a split-second adjustment to best handle the pitch thrown. As the ball approaches the plate, press the button to swing. And I'll interject that I really don't know. I think it's all about just connecting the ball. I don't know if your placement really matters as long as you connect with the ball. I don't know if like you're more towards the pitcher or further back towards the catcher if it determines if the ball's on the ground or in the air. I couldn't really feel a difference. Maybe it does, but I didn't notice. Running. After you hit the ball, you control the runners. All the forced runners will advance automatically if the ball is hit on the ground or bounces before it's caught. Runners who aren't forced will rely on your coaching. There are 4 joystick controls for running. Joystick left, button released, advance all runners. Joystick right, button released, hold all runners. Joystick left, button press, advance the lead runner only, and joystick right, button press, hold the lead runner. So this can decide if you want to move all your runners or just one. Infield fly rule. If a fly ball is hit to the infield and there are at least 2 outs and first base is occupied, the runners will not advance and the batter will be called out. I don't know if that ever happened while I was playing. Fielding. After the ball is hit, you will see either the left or right infield screen depending on the flight of the ball. While the infield screens are displayed, with the button pressed, you can select the fielder based on the following joystick's position. So if you're on the left side for left infield, pressing up will throw it to second base, down for the catcher, right for the pitcher, left for third base. And actually, I think right actually goes to first base. I don't know if that's accurate. I think if you do right, it goes to first base. For the right infield, up is for second, down for catcher, right for first base, and left for pitcher. So again, I think you can. I think you can throw it from third to first. If it's smacked to the outfield, so that might not be right. The left, right, or center field screen will be displayed. Once you guide your fielder to retrieve the ball with the button pressed, you use the joystick controls to throw up for second, left to third, down to home plate, right to first. So yeah, you can do that. All right. More fielding and tips. The flashing arrows in the baseball diamond at the top of the screen will remind you of joystick position for making throws. Since the infield is never displayed all at once, a small baseball diamond will inform you of your current position of the runners. A base note, your infield players can only move up and down within the following boundaries. And they show you a picture where how basically the shortstop or the second baseman can only be at the top of your screen. The third or first baseman can be below him, the pitcher below him, and the catcher at the very bottom. So imagine like you cut the screen into 4 long rectangles and the players can't go lower or higher. They have to stay within their rectangle. So if you caught the ball as a catcher, you cannot run it to first base or to second base. You have to stay in your area. So that does take some getting used to. I heard one person say that there is a possible glitch where if the ball hits right at the right spot, nobody can get it and your game is basically frozen because you can't get the ball to go to the next batter. I don't know if this is true. I've never come across it. So I don't know if this is accurate or if it just that the guy didn't know which player and he just couldn't get it himself. I'm not sure. Tips from the pros. To judge a fly ball, chase the ball's shadow, not the ball itself. It will always land to your advantage, trust me. And I must say that the ball shadow is easier to follow than in real sports baseball. Remember to watch the flashing arrows in the small baseball diamond at the top of your screen when trying to decide which base you want to throw to. Of course, official baseball rules apply. 3 strikes and you're out. 4 balls take your base. 3 outs, the inning's over, and so on. I hope these tips will give you a better grip on the game and a great shot at winning the championship. Now we covered all the bases. Get your pro ball career off to a flying start. Select an opponent, press reset, and play ball. And when they say select opponent, you're just selecting human or computer, not like a different team. There's not teams per se. It's just 2 teams, unnamed teams. And I believe, I think if I remember correctly, if it's the top of the 9th inning and you're batting last, if you're still winning after you shut out the computer, and you're still winning, they won't make you bat because it doesn't make a difference. Even though a lot of earlier games you had to go through the full 9 innings no matter who was winning. And I believe this game also can go into extra innings as well. All right. So that's the manual. Graphically speaking, I think the game looks a step up from the 2600, but you might not notice it at first. When I first put the game in, graphically, I wasn't very impressed. I'm like, this looks just basically like the 2600 game. And let me say this, the 2600 game for a 2600 game looks really good. So I think what happened here is the 2600 really pushed the 2600 to the limits, the 2600 version, but the 7800 version, not quite as much. If you remember Title Match Pro Wrestling, on the 7800, it looks really good. It doesn't play good, but it looks really good. Pete Rose Baseball, it looks a little better. You know, it's not that big of a leap like Title Match Pro Wrestling. The animation of the pitcher is nice, and the little dudes in the 2600 version, they look like chalk stick figures. In this version, they actually look a little more cartoony, more like the NES version of baseball, but it's not as big of an improvement as between the Title Match Pro Wrestlings on the 2600 and 7800. So I think they could have been better, maybe add a few more colors. I mean, there's a lot of green in the game too, because like the field is green and some of the backdrops are green. The music and sound, when it starts, it ends on, and the home of the free of the Star-Spangled Banner, just do-do-do-do-do-do. And then you have the crowd roaring, which the crowd, this is kind of funny. It's a 2600, what I call just your generic roar sound. So if you're a flying game, it's for flying. If you're surfing, like in, I think California games, I think it's the sound of the waves, or maybe Real Sports Volleyball. And it's the sound of cheering. It's just a, kind of a wind tunnelish sound, but it works okay here. A lot better than Real Sports Baseball. That was more of an annoying sound. And then once in a while, I think they'll do a charge like do-do-do-do-do-do when you can have a chance to get like a grand slam or something like that. Atari Age gives this a rarity 4. Digital Press gives it a rarity 5. I'm leaning more towards the Digital Press because this was one of the last games I could find on the 7800 when I was collecting all the 7800 games. It's not easy to find. It probably came out very late, and by the time it came out, they were probably clearancing out 7800 games at most stores. As far as the external reviews go, Atari Age had 4 of them for 59% average. The high one was 75%, the low was 50%. And as far as the high score club goes, there was an entry, and the settings was 9 innings versus a computer, because there's only one, computer setting. And Gorfy won 24-4. He beat the computer. And just to remind you, in Real Sports Baseball, the other person won at a low score. It was like 2-1 or something like that. So this should tell you something. Pete Rose Baseball is much more user-friendly to play and is not nearly as difficult. It's pretty easy to win, even though it can be challenging at times. On eBay, loose copies, I only saw loose copies on the sold listings, and those ranged from $22 to $25. So like I said, the Rarity 5 makes more sense to me. I did not own this growing up, but I did own the 2600 version, and I really liked the 2600 version. And I also liked playing it with my cousin and my friend, my neighbor across the street when I had a chance. It was a great game to play both like the back of the box says, by myself or with a friend. It was really good. As far as Atarian goes, let's see. Issue 1, Pete Rose Baseball, they had like a little paragraph blurb in like the coming games. It's like it's coming. There was no screenshot. It just said that it was coming, and it referenced like you can have a 95-mile-an-hour fastball like Steve Carlton or Fernando Valenzuela. Sorry if I'm messing up his name. But yeah, it was just a little thing there. Interesting, on the same page, they showed some of their athletes that they had sponsoring Atari games. Did you know that they had some athletes that they hired for some commercials? Like Ozzie Smith for baseball. Doug Williams, the quarterback for the Redskins, did a football commercial or photo shoot, and Spud Webb did one for basketball. And so they had a feature ad there. And also there was that Absolute ad that appeared once that showed all 6 games. And I think that was it. Really, Atari and Magazine really didn't give the third parties a lot of coverage. Their games never appeared in the top 10, and I'm wondering if there was a little shenanigans with that, like they wouldn't allow them, or maybe it's just harder to find a third-party game, so people didn't pick those all the time. But yeah, not a lot of coverage on the third-party games. So again, one day, I should try and see if I can find contact information on the editor of the magazine and maybe email him some questions if he's around. I'm sure he is. I just don't know who he is. If anybody knows, let me know. And if you were ever involved in the Atari 7800 in any way or form, like as a worker or something, and you ever want to share your story, feel free to send it to Atari7800podcast@AOL.com. Or contact me through Facebook. It would be awesome to hear what you have to say. All right, so that's Pete Rose Baseball. Let's call this one a game and go on to listener feedback.
Greetings, Earth people. It's me again, IC Robots from the Toys R Us Report, and you are listening to the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast with your host, the No Swear Gamer. What is an Atari 7800? Well, it's like a 2600, but almost 3 times better. Enjoy the show.
Over at Atari Age, I made a thread asking people for what their thoughts were on these 2 games. I asked them to rate them on my 4-point scale. The highest rating you could give a game is a Hall of Fame game. That's a top 5 game on the system. Next is a solid game. Then comes a meh game for a game that's okay, but doesn't really do much for you. And finally, a trash game, which is one of the bottom 5 games on the system. Retro Gamer 81081, who's given several of these, and thank you for that, says F-18 Hornet. Meh game. The graphics and animation are amazing in this game, especially for 1988. The negatives are you can only use missiles to fire and not use bombs. Well, except when you drop them, but yeah, I totally agree. You have to use the switches on the system for landing. It's a pretty confusing game. If it wasn't so complex, it has the makings of a very solid game. Yeah, you definitely need the manual for this game. Pete Rose Baseball. Meh game. It is actually the best baseball game on the system, second behind one-on-one basketball, I guess he's saying as far as sport games go. Another game where the physics outweigh the details. The graphics are great, the animation is great, the cons, players look like mummies on the field, and fielding is difficult. Plus, it's a chore to move the desired player. It does take a little getting used to. If it wasn't for that flaw, this would be a solid game as well. All right, so then Uyama family, who says F-18 is trash, Pete Rose is trash. Both games on the 7800 library are hateful for me. Thank you, Uyama family. Save 2600, says Pete Rose, meh, F-18 trash. Getting a lot of mini reviews here today. All right, and it looks like the reviews are kind of all over the place as far as, because didn't he give, meh, some mehs and trash. So far not great reviews. I thought the first guy gave F-18 a solid, but it was just a meh. Gambler172 says, hi, Pete Rose is a meh game. F-18 is a trash game. Greetings, Walter. Thank you, Walter. And Hammer25 says, Pete Rose, trash. The fielding zones and players were stuck in were awful, and it was way too easy to hit home runs. F-18 is a solid game. All right. Soul Blazer, who's also Greg from the SNES podcast, says F-18 Hornet. The box cover is very nice. Sometimes when you say that, I'm really getting ready to give some bad review. Whenever they start out, hey, the box is nice. Sorry. The box cover is very nice, and this feels like another computer port for the 7800, although searching online seems this was an original game for the system. Actually, there was a computer version of this game, but it was very different. It was a little more 3D-ish. I just saw some pictures of it, and they probably came out around the same time. It's amazing how many flight sims were made for this system. Or actually, yeah, no, the F-18, wasn't that on the Commodore? There was a computer port, yeah. Anyways, it's amazing how many flight sims were made for the system. The game is ambitious for what it tries to do. Having the switches to land the plane is both ingenious and frustrating rolled into one. Also, why do you only have missiles to fire and no cannon? Between these two factors, it seems like Absolute wasn't sure if they wanted to have a more arcade-like game or a flight sim game. Well, that's a good observation. Instead, it seems like they tried to balance and came up short on both ends. Controls overall were difficult. On the plus side, for the 7800, graphics on this game are great and the animation is amazing considering you actually fly into the background. I also like the wide range of missions that you can pick your mission, and the control panel is realistic looking without overwhelming you. Sound is grating though, and I quickly turned it off. Finally, I found it quite hard to hit anything with your missile. Overall, I want to like this game, and it was a good effort, but it falls short. Feeling neither like a sim or an arcade game, I'd rather play either Top Gun or its sequel on the NES if I feel like an 8-bit dogfighting game. Rating meh. P. Rose Baseball. I was really hoping this would not be another cruddy sports game for the 7800 like the last couple I played. Again, I really like the cover. Uh-oh. And it has a very baseball and 70-ish feel to it. As is unfortunately the case on the 7000, I found the sound grating and annoying. The graphics are really good though, with the behind-the-pitcher view that is used in a lot of modern baseball games. Both of these combined really work to give it a look of a modern sport title. And the game is really slow though, probably the slowest baseball game I've ever played. Baseball is already slow enough without the slow pace and to hit the balls and your player moves. Also, I found the controls complicated and the players hard to control precisely. I think the 2600 version of the game is better because it was able to do more with the hardware that it was on and was overall more enjoyable baseball game. So interesting. He's saying it's better because of what it could, because like I said before, yeah, for the 2600, it's amazing. It's really amazing they got it out. I think that this game is the same exact game if you look down it with a new paint job. I think that's all it is. Just like Title Match Pro Wrestling, I think this game is the same exact game with slightly better graphics. So in that regard, it's better than the 2600. But when you compare what the system could do, the 2600 the version is more impressive. I think the game is the best baseball game on the 1700, but that's a low bar. I'm sorry. I conclude once again, I'd rather play the equivalent title on the NES from this time period than this game. Rating meh. I'll say this. It is quick in between, from in between the pitcher batter thing. It could be quick, but when the ball is hit a long way, it can slow down a little bit. I think they did that on purpose so that you had time to field it and throw it back, because if it went too fast, there's no way you could throw it back in time. And when you hit a home run, it's almost a pain because the players slowly go across the bases. So I think the game moves quick sometimes, but at other times it is very slow. But I will say this, I'd rather play Pete Rose Baseball in the 7800 than the original NES Baseball. I'm sure there's better games on the NES baseball-wise, like Baseball Simulator 1000 is one of my favorite baseball games. But I would rather play this than NES Baseball. That's just me, though. Drac is back, said, I'm meh for both. They look cool, especially Hornet, given the type of game it is, but didn't find either any fun. In truth, I found most absolute entertainment games to fit this build. The drum line for Hornet was later reused in Ikari Warriors, also an absolute trait. I'll have to listen for that when I play that. And then Av1 says, I took a video of a successful run on F-18 Hornet back in the early 90s, and I still think I have it somewhere. Really gave me an awesome sense of accomplishment to beat the game. Yeah, and I actually... I'm thinking about putting a video together separately of just all 4 missions back to back to show people that, it can be done. Not that, I didn't get the best ratings, but I was able to complete the game. Over at my email, and you can email me over at Atari7800podcast@AOL.com. That's Atari, the word Atari, then the number 7800, then the word podcast at AOL.com. Atari7800podcast@AOL.com, so there's no the in it. If you email me an email submission or an audio submission, you'll get entered into contest. Right now, I'm about to draw for the Seagull 78 adapter. I'm going to take all the recent feedbacks I got from this episode and the previous few episodes and do a drawing. And next episode, I'll tell you who the winner was. And so I just want to make sure I have all my ducks in a row, and I need some time to get all that information and randomize it and figure out who won. But yeah, someone's going to win a Seagull 78 adapter. Unless they don't want one, then they can have one of my games, but I'm guessing they'll want the adapter. And then next time I'll probably be giving away some more, a choice of a game if you win. So every few episodes I do that. I think 4 episodes is what I've been doing just so I can gather enough. Anyway, from the email, I got one from Richard who said, Hey Phil, hey Richard. I was just about to write about F-18 Hornet when I realized I didn't own the game. I owned F-14 Tomcat. Glad I saved myself from writing about the wrong game. I can understand the confusion, though. As a kid, I was wondering, why do you have 2 games that are so similar? So instead, I'll bring back a question you asked about which games would have been nice to have on the 7800. 2 games, I think, and I think I asked that on Facebook. I may have asked it on the podcast, so well, I don't know. 2 games I think would have been great on the 7800 are Frogger and Popeye. Very interesting choices. I also thought of an arcade game that I don't think had many home system versions at all. Rally X by Namco, later released in North America by Midway. Yes. It's on some of the museum collections, but I don't know if it got many home releases. I first played this game on the Namco Museum on the PS1 and currently play it on my Xbox 360. I think this game was underappreciated in its time because Namco released Pac-Man at the same time. It has a lot of similarities to Pac-Man since it's basically a maze game with a car being chased by other cars. It's like Pac-Man meets Dodge and one of my favorite games on the 2600. Interesting. Since I have a small number of 7800 games, I'll try to come up with other classic arcade games that should have been on the 7800 before we get to the games I owned, like Mario Brothers and Basketball, which we'll get to. Yeah, interesting thing about Frogger, it was like the last game, one of the last games released on both the Sega Genesis and the SNES. Late in its life, I don't know if it was Majesco, but somebody released a almost arcade perfect port on both systems. Till then, take care. Thanks, you too. I really appreciate that. From Kevin Art Kevin, I really had more time to write better feedback on all these. I'm always so rushed anymore, and I just quickly type up a blurb, and later I wish I said something else. As for the possible mission hack, and I was asking him about this, that was done by John K. Harvey, as far as I know. I just took an interest in changing the graphics in the game and wanted to add text to the end screen as a holdover until author Kriwat finished his plans to add a voice to the game. At this point, I doubt this will ever happen, but he did post in a thread recently after it was resurrected for your podcast, so you never know. Wouldn't that be interesting if the author came back to add that to the system, to the game after it got brought up on the podcast? That would be really cool. And Mr. Kriwat, if you're out there and you want to email me or message me on Facebook or something, or through Atari Age, and tell me anything that I missed on that episode or anything you'd like to add, I'd be happy to hear from you. The minor graphic edits and ending text addition turned into a much larger project with me completely redrawing the player sprites, PDA, and enemy ball. I left the robots alone because I already really liked them. Quick feedback on some other games. Cracked. I always thought the graphics were impressive and the screenshots in the Sears catalog intrigued me. It wasn't until about 94 I finally got the game. The gameplay is fun, but it gets difficult fast, and as a kid, games with impending doom, no way to win, always made me so nervous I tended to avoid them. Yeah, I understand, and I just call those games of doom on my No Swear Gamer show, where no matter what, you're going to lose. I think Missile Command is probably one of the most depressing games in the history of video games, because not only are you going to lose, but you're going to fail protecting your cities. It's just crazy when you think about it. These days, I'm much more patient with high-score games, and at least this one had multiple levels with interesting scenery. I'll give this one a solid. It's on the low end of the solid scale, but it's definitely worth more than a meh to me. It's not one I play often, but I do think of it fondly overall. Dark Chambers. I used to love this game. It was one of the few I had earlier in my 7800 collection that felt more like an NES game. Although I was a diehard Atari fan, I loved the NES style games and always wanted to see games on the Atari that could compare to or outdo the Nintendo. Well, guess what? We're talking about Commando next. It has a great title screen, great graphics, and an interesting variation of mazes. One day early in my teens, I was determined to play the game to the end. I spent several hours going through level after level, anticipating what kind of ending I would see after I finished them all. And by the way, Kevin, I totally understand, because as a 7800 owner, just having a game with an ending felt special. If that was possible, it felt special, because a lot of NES games had endings. Mario, you saved the princess. Zelda, you saved the princess. Metroid, you saved the princess Metroid, or you saved yourself, whatever. But you know what I'm talking about. It was nice to have games with ending, even though high score games can be fun as well. Finally, I got past the last one, and what? I was now back at the first level. No ending, just the usual Atari game, repeating everything all over. I was so disappointed at the lack of payoff, I didn't play the game at all for many years. In fact, to this day, I never spent the time to play through all the levels again. However, my tastes have changed enough that I can play the game for enjoyment and not have an ending. I'll give this one solid as well. If it had an ending, even just a single congratulations screen, it would be a definite Hall of Fame in my book. But as it is, it's just solid. Cheers, Kevin. And thank you, Kevin, so much for all you do in the Atari community and for doing my Atari art. I really appreciate that. He's a hard worker, and I appreciate him taking some time to send in some thoughts. That's really cool of him. All right, let's see. Got another one, and this one is from the Duke of Hurl, who I know over at the Retro League forums. And they're doing something cool over at the Retro League podcast. The Retro League was a podcast that highly influenced me to get into the No Swear Gamer video line. Actually, the first game I reviewed, Bubsy, I won from the from the Retro League. And so I really appreciate those guys. And over at their forums, they're going to pick the best game from 1990. And right now, through the end of August 2015, they are taking nominations for the best game for 1990. And one of the categories they have is a wild card round where systems that didn't have a lot of games, you can nominate games. So if you want to, you can go over there, nominate the best NES games from the 90s, the best pinball and arcade games, the best computer game from the 90s, and you can also nominate games for like the 7800, because there was a few titles like Ninja Golf and Midnight Mutants and and Motorcycle that you can nominate if you so desire. So if you want to see those games in the tournament, head on over there to the Retro League forums. I think it's just forums.theretroleague.com. Sign up there if you've never been a member there. Have a great group of guys there. And you can start nominating games. And then in September, you can start voting on what was the best game in the 90s from all the systems, including the 7800. So this will be probably the last year that the 7800 can be represented, because that was the last year they had games, unless they do like in earlier years at some point. Anyway, so Duke Hurl says, "Hey, Phil." Hey, Duke. This is my submission to the podcast. I only own or ever have played a handful, so here's my reviews on those. Pole position 2. I've always been a fan of racing games, and when I first played this one, I was impressed. It's a far cry from those I played before, the 2600, although the sounds were very familiar. Well, probably because it's using 2600 sounds. The graphics and gameplay were excellent for the time, and I had a lot of fun with it. I always thought it would be neat to be able to qualify rather than start from the back of the pack as default, or just drive and pass an endless amount of other cars. The fact that the tracks were based on real tracks and weren't random, or top-down view of a totally straight track just trying to dodge other cars, was cool. This was the first time I have ever heard of Suzuka, and I never saw again in gaming until Gran Turismo on the PlayStation 1. I rated a solid. Real Sports Baseball. This game I wanted to love from the beginning. It was just terribly difficult. Fielding is the worst part of this game. If a ball is hit between two fielders, the game can quickly swap between the two, which can lead you to running away from the ball with two different fielders as it rolls into the outfield. Catching fly balls is not fun either. I've had the most luck with trying to position my fielder so that the ball lands on his right foot, resulting in a fly ball out. It seems as if you position your fielder so that it hits him in the chest, it will fall in for a hit. Pitching is manageable. I'm even pretty good at times, but due to the fielding woes, I'm not striking the batters out. I can give up big innings here and there. Batting is fine. I don't expect to be able to score several runs per inning, but if you can pitch and feel decent, then 5 runs scored per game should be enough to be competitive. It just doesn't work out in this game. This game had me convinced I was a terrible gamer in my youth until I realized that I was having why I was having so many problems with it. I was thrilled hearing your review of this game to find out that the high score on Atari Age was winning by 2 runs. Maybe I'm not so bad after all. I rate this a trash, bottom 5 for sure. Well, yeah, that's cool. That's cool to find out. Like, hey, maybe I'm not so bad. Robotron 2084. Always thought this game was cool, hard but cool. Never played it with twin sticks before, but I can see how it would make it much easier. And in my opinion, much more enjoyable. This is one game I feel the outdated game sounds actually enhanced the game. Really gave it old school arcade game feel. I like trying to rescue people and trying to kill the enemies that spawn other flying enemies before they get a chance. I rate this Hall of Fame. Wow. Food Fight, one of my favorite games ever. This is the one game that as a kid, when all my friends were playing the NES, they actually would want to play this game when they came to my house. I remember my younger cousins would crack up every time Charlie would swallow the ice cream cone. Recently, while playing on beginner, I made it to level 105 with a score of around 2.5 million. My Sega 3-button controller helped immensely with this. I'm only playing it on harder difficulty levels now after that one. This is a game that I will always play routinely for probably as long as my Atari 7800 keeps working. I rate it Hall of Fame. Centipede. This game I didn't really care much for as a kid, but as an adult I enjoy this quite a bit. This is another game that has become more fun to me since I started using my Sega 3-button controller for play. The gameplay works very well, and when I die, it's my fault. I never feel like the controls let me down. What I really love about this game is the sound. When I hear it, I'm instantly back in the arcades as a kid. The sound from this game is one of those that will always be in the background anytime you step into an arcade. I rate it solid. Choplifter. Before I had the NES, this was my go-to game. I always thought the chopper looked totally cool. Well, I agree there. I feel the controls were good, although shooting forward while flying was a little bit of work. I never knew what the air mines were as a kid. They just looked like jellyfish or alien spaceships to me. I always liked being able to rotate the chopper for aiming your fire or picking up hostages from both sides. I would also feel some relief crossing the Atari logo barriers while bringing back a load of hostages, and very much appreciated the last passenger signaling that I was clear for liftoff. I would rate this a solid. Mario Brothers. I'm not going to cover this for a while, but I'm just going to keep rolling with his email. I played Super Mario Brothers at a friend's house before I ever got this game, so I thought it was awesome to have a game that it all started from. Well, it wasn't exactly what I expected. It plays like Donkey Kong or Joust. I enjoy it for what it is, but I never really got into it. I would rate it a meh. So be interesting to see what other people say. And feel honored, Duke or Hurl. This is the first time I think I ever let someone rate a game I have yet covered, because I think I have someone wrote me about Motorcycle, and I haven't put that in yet. I'll have to dig that out for that episode. Ms. Pac-Man. I spotted this one at a retro game store early this year and picked it up for $5. Since I always wanted it and haven't seen a 7800 game at the store other than Pole Position 2. I haven't dedicated a solid hour into playing it yet, only played short bursts, but it is exactly what I remember Pac-Man being. At least what I remember playing in the arcades. This is another game that just hearing it takes me back to the late 80s and what it sounded like walking up to the entrance of an arcade at the mall. My previous experience with Pac-Man on a home system was the Pac-Man 2600 version, wow, which never seemed right. Well, that's a step up. From 2600 Pac-Man to Ms. Pac-Man on 1700, that's a big step up. It's nice to have this one on hand when I just want to relive a piece of my childhood. I rated a solid. Thanks for reading and thanks for the podcast. You're welcome. Because of the podcast, I now have an ever-growing list of 7,800 games I'm on the lookout for. Going to be looking for games in the upcoming week. I'm really hoping to score a copy of Ninja Golf. Wish I had that one as a kid. Signed, David. Thank you. Or signed, Duke or Hurl. Thank you very much, Duke. I really appreciate that, and I hope you get a good deal on a copy of Ninja Golf. They can be very hard to come by, and if you have any other thoughts on any other games you get that I already covered, be sure to send those in as well. I hope you get a copy of Ball Blazer, too. I think you'll like it. Okay, so speaking of David is my first audio submission, and I believe it's one that he sent for last week's episode, but it was right past when I was doing that. So let's see what David has to say. I think it's about Cracked and Dark Chambers. So David, take it away.
Hi, Phil. This is Dave with another audio submission, and this week your games are Cracked and Dark Chambers. Dark Chambers I already owned, and I bought it because I had read that it was basically an upgraded version of the game Gauntlet, and I like Gauntlet a lot, so I did buy Dark Chambers pretty early on in my 7800 collecting. However, Cracked is not a game that I owned, and I wasn't really interested in owning it until I saw it coming up on your podcast. I had always seen it around on eBay for a little under $10. So I decided, since you were doing it, and since I want to do audio submissions about the 7800 because it is my favorite retro console, I decided I'd pick it up and give it a play. And I gotta say, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. The way it sounded when I read about it online, it just kind of sounded like a shooting gallery type game, which it is in some aspects, but at the same time, the every other level where you have to throw the eggs at the guys, that's really hard. And it's actually it's hard and not in a bad way. Like, it's challenging and it's fun. So I played that for an hour or two, and then I popped in Dark Chambers, which I had already played before. And I really like Dark Chambers. I'm a pretty big fan, especially because of those blue guys, or the purple guys, depending on how you have your colors set on your TV. They look like they're carrying around a bass guitar while they're chasing you, and I always thought that was pretty funny. But, yeah, I really like Dark Chambers. I think it's a great game. I think it's a standout title for sure. I would definitely rate that as a solid game. I'd probably rate Cracked a solid game as well, just because, for me anyway, personally, it really exceeded my expectations of what it was going to be. And I could play that. I mean, I only expected to play that game for about 10 minutes. I ended up playing it for about an hour and a half. So it's a solid game. It definitely holds your attention for a while. So that'll do it for me this week. Look forward to your future episodes.
Thank you, David, for taking the time to make that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, correct. I think a lot of people just call it a standard light gun game, but it has the catching element to it too, which definitely changes it. And I never knew until the last episode when I was doing research that it was made for a computer mouse. And when you do that, now it totally makes sense. A computer mouse definitely makes sense. It feels like it could use a mouse. Be interesting, as I said, to play with a mouse, but I haven't done so yet. So interesting that you like these games. I think like Cracked and Dark Chambers last time on the episode, a lot of people were kind of cold on them, but with your feedback and some of the feedback I read in the email, it sounds like we're finding more fans for this game. I don't know if anyone rated it solid before this episode, so now we're getting some solid ratings for Cracked and Dark Chambers. So it's really cool. I really like it how, one game one person can like and another not so much. It's cool to hear that because it would be boring otherwise if we all agreed on the same game. All right, guess what? David's back with another audio submission for this week's game, so let's get ready for a double dose of David. David, take it away.
This week, the games are F-18 Hornet and Pete Rose Baseball. I've never played either one of these games, so I went and picked them up, playing them for the first time. So,
what is that?
An Atari.
That's what I thought.
It's an Atari 7800.
Are you trying to be like the angry video game nerd or something?
Alright, so I've never played this before. Let's see. I don't have the instructions. Let's see how this goes. Select a mission. You get to pick between 4 missions, apparently. Alright. Location, United States. Mojave Desert. Mission, pilot your aircraft on. Okay. So, it looks like a simulator game. But, am I shooting at that? What is this, like 3D? Look at this. Look at these 3D graphics. How do I take off? Pull back? Pull down? Yeah. I think. I can't tell if I'm taking off or not. Am I in the air?
I don't know, hitting something.
I think I'm in the air. No, I'm about to crash. Yeah!
Oh.
That's how you do it.
Alright,
so that's F-18 Hornet. I would rate that too complicated for my taste, so probably trash. It looks kind of on par with Super Huey. Alright, Pete Rose Baseball. Remember Pete Rose? He bet on himself and now he's not allowed to play baseball anymore. I'm doing this thing for this podcast. Press reset. Here we go. Alright, the home of the brave. Pete Rose Baseball. I guess I'm pitching. Oh, what? He hit it? Get the ball. Get the ball. Get the ball. Get the ball. Well, I need the infield guy. Can you get that? Can you get that for me, homie? Man, they hit the ball every time. Come on. Come on. No, they're going to get home runs. Get the ball. Get the ball. Infield. Outfield. Get the ball. No, he got a home run. But this is actually fun, though. These graphics are legit. I mean, I can tell what's happening. I know where I'm at, so that's a plus. Catch it.
Get it.
Get it. It's a pop fly.
Second baseman.
No! It's too hard because you got to go from pressing A to pick the guy. And you got to press B in a direction. Pick the guy. Ah, jeez. Foul ball.
I like how they run sideways.
Like they're still facing forward.
Yeah.
3 outs. Switch sides. So now I'm up at bat. They're at bat for like 5 minutes. I was up bat for like 30 seconds. Pete Rose Baseball. After playing this much of it, I'm going to say it's hard, but it has its charm. Really. I mean, I bet at the time this probably was like a really legit baseball game.
The crowd is going crazy.
Yeah, them crowd noises are hilarious.
It's thunder. You're like, oh, is that crowd or thunder?
It kind of sounds like a race car, like how old race cars sounded.
Yeah.
It's a home run! Oh, get that. Yeah. It's 1 out. It's my first out. All right, here we go. Come on. Second. Nope. Bases are loaded again. How many points do they have? 11-0. It's the second inning.
Somebody's going to get a home run, too.
All right. Pete Rose Baseball. I'm going to say that's a solid game. because, it's obviously a baseball game. It's playable. Solid game. Pete Rose Baseball. F-18 Hornet, it's trash.
That was cool. I really appreciate. Is that crowd or is that thunder? It's a race car. It's a space shuttle. It's the ocean waves crashing. It's whatever you want to be. It's like the most useful sound in the 2600 library that you can use on 7800 games as well. Very cool. You rated Pete Rose Baseball legit. And guess what? We're going to change the name of Pete Rose Baseball now just because of that to Get the Ball, Get the Ball, Get the Ball. That was great. Thanks very much, David. Really appreciate that. One of the most unique listener feedbacks I've ever gotten to date. But guess what? It's time for everybody's favorite part of the show. That's right, guys. It's time for Shinto Says. Let's see what Shinto has to say today.
A couple things happened over the last couple weeks that may seem completely separate, but if you look at them in a certain way, it's creepy how connected they are. 1. My wife and I finished up the 7th season of Doctor Who. 2. Phil's upcoming episode is on Pete Rose Baseball. There is an episode of Doctor Who toward the end of Season 7 called The Name of the Doctor. In this episode, we are introduced to new villains known as the Whisper Men. These Whisper Men have completely white faces, no eyes, no nose, just big scary teeth. Pete Rose Baseball features players with, plain white faces. Replace the top hats of the Whisper Men with baseball caps and close their mouths, and Pete Rose Baseball is being played by Whisper Men. If you know what I'm talking about, if you're familiar with this episode of Doctor Who, then Pete Rose Baseball becomes a whole lot more entertaining. I even came up with a Whisper Men-like rhyme.
The man who waits will walk once more when the pitcher throws ball 4.
During the Real Sports Baseball episode, I mentioned how that game replaced Pete Rose Baseball for me and my brother, but that's not the whole story. See, Real Sports Baseball was new and shiny, and we had logged a whole lot of time playing Pete Rose. A lot of time. We play Pete Rose more than any other baseball game. Earl Weaver Baseball on the PC probably comes in second. So, after 3 outs, of course, you change sides. I thought that the game just had one animation for this, but my brother insisted there were 2, one with each team returning to their own separate dugouts after the 3rd out. No, I think they show the same side both times, I said. Okay, my brother replied, we'll bet on it. I bet you a Lynx game that they go to different dugouts. The next time there were 3 outs, I lost my copy of Rampage. Despite my foolishness and lack of observation, I think this is a solid baseball game. I haven't played it since my brother and I parted ways, but I think it was a pretty fun game, so solid for this one. F-18 Hornet, that's one my brother bought, and he played it a little bit. I didn't really, so it's kind of a meh game for me. I'm sorry I don't have any more detail than that. It really didn't make much of an impression. Oh, in case you were wondering, I did actually get my copy of Rampage back a few months ago. My brother and his son didn't play with the Lynx anymore, so his Model 2 instead of games joined my Model 1 instead of games. So Rampage is back home. It just took 20 plus years of patience.
Wow, Shinto, I don't know if it's the lack of sleep because now you're doing a podcast or it's just the experience, but I think your submissions are getting better and better. Unlike me, because I recorded my Atari Jaguar game-by-game podcast submission for Cybermorph, very, very drained and tired, but I really wanted to do it, so it wasn't that great, I don't think, but it was there nonetheless. I just wanted to get it in. After I'd done it, I was like, oh, there was so much other stuff I wanted to say, but oh, well, I wasn't able to get as creative with the Whisper Men. Pete Rose, Whisper Man Baseball. Go get it. Get the ball. Get the ball. Get the ball. That sounds like a good time. By the way, in case you're wondering, just random, because there's no Atari Lynx cast yet, the Atari Lynx version of Rampage is very unique because you have to climb the buildings. It doesn't show you the whole building on a screen like most other versions. You actually have to climb the building to see the top of it. So it's like a zoomed in version of Rampage. And I think it also gives you more monsters to choose from. Been a while since I played it, but if my memory serves me correctly. And just curious, Shinto, if you care to answer, do you prefer the Model 1 Lynx over the Model 2? If so, let us know why. Just a curious question there. But thanks again, Shinto. Be sure to check out his Atari Jaguar game-by-game podcast. I already downloaded the Cybermorph episode, just haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. Where did you learn to fly? So, let's see. That's it for the listener feedbacks. Remember, you can send your listener feedbacks audio or text to Atari7800podcast@AOL.com. That's Atari7800podcast@AOL.com. why don't you go ahead and go to iTunes, leave a review for the show, even if it's not 5-star, that's fine. Leave a review for the show. I think what I might do, I have 2 Seagull 78 adapters by Aladdin. So if you want to win the next one, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to randomly pick someone who wrote a review, whether it's from way back or they just wrote it today. I'll probably pick people who did reviews, but there'll be a window when you can do it. I'm not sure, but I think that's what I'm going to do. And go to Aladdin.com to check out some of this cool stuff. And remember, you can use coupon code FERG, F-E-R-G, to save 10% on his wonderful joysticks. What else do I have to remember? Oh, I'm part of the Retro Junkies Network, just like the Retro Junkies Winging It show hosted by Rob and Landon. Check out the Winging It show. I think if you go to iTunes, you just search for the Retro Junkies Super Show, you'll find it there. And another podcast I've been listening to, the Retro Rewind podcast, which covers movies mostly from a long time, from back in the Ferg. And let's see, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. On Facebook, I have a No Swear Gamer page and also an Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast page. On Twitter, it's just a No Swear Gamer. Speaking of the No Swear Gamer, go to YouTube and check out my No Swear Gamer videos and like and subscribe over there. I'd appreciate that as well. And if you want to support the show financially, you can through Patreon, where you can give as low as $1 a month. Just go to patreon.com and search for the No Swear Gamer as well. I'm combining it all into one because the podcast is kind of a limited run, but the No Swear Gamer will probably go on beyond that. So, is that everything? Did I cover everything? I think so. Oh, what's next? Okay, remember, you can send feedback on previously covered games. Let's see, let me find my list of what games are coming up. Next up, episode 17 is going to be Commando and Crossbow. Episode 18 is going to be Ace of Aces and Mean 18 Golf. Episode 19 is going to be Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. And episode 20 is going to be Mario Brothers and Fight Night. And later on in the month of September, I'll let you know I am going to have to take an episode week off. I'm having some family come into town, so I'm going to keep first things first, and I'm just going to flat out take that scheduled time off. So I go every 2 weeks, but between those 2 episodes, it's going to be more like 4 weeks. So I'm just planning in advance. But I do plan on doing Commando and Crossbow, and I'm going to try and get that one out on time. So if you have any feedback on that, send it in, because it's only going to be like a week between episodes for this case. I'm going to try and get back on schedule. So yeah, I think that's it. So send in the feedback. See you guys around, and remember, guys, games are fun, but always keep first things first. I will check you later.
Way to go, Phil. You forgot to rate the games yourself. I guess we will have to wait until the next episode. Again. Maybe I should go to the professionals over at the Genesis Gems. They could use a robotic announcer.
But yeah, thanks a lot, Rob. Jeez, we're gonna get you back.
Here we are. We're gonna make him play Barney by himself. He's gonna have to do a game by game Sega podcast about Barney by himself. I think that'd be a good episode.
I'd love it. I'd listen to that.
Go get some pointers from like Ferg and Phil how to do podcasts by yourself.